Welcome, everyone, to the Journal of Parkinson's Disease and Cure Parkinson's webinar. I'm Thilo Kunath from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm really pleased to be hosting this webinar on exercise and motivation. So after over 1 year break from these webinars, we're back, and we're very happy to be back. And also, you have a new chair. So I'm taking over from Patrick Brunden, big shoes to fill, and I'm going to do the best I can. So before I introduce our guests, I just wanted to say, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A panel, and they'll be moderated by people from Cure Parkinson's, and we'll try to get to them during the webinar. But if we can't get to them during the webinar, they will be answered after the webinar. Your contact details will be associated with your question. Okay, so today's topic is exercise and motivation. So we had exercise as a webinar, webinar number 7 in January 2020. But this one is going to be slightly different. So this one is going to be looking at exercise and motivation and apathy that is very common in Parkinson's, and how the two can work together to get the benefits. We have 4 amazing panelists that I'm going to introduce one by one as we go along. But first up, we're going to hear a few minutes from Julie Jones. So Julie Jones is a lecturer at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen. She has run a very interesting study called PD Connect. And most recently, she was the 2022 Edinburgh Parkinson's Lecturer on exercise. And it was fantastic to have her give this talk. And if you look up Edinburgh Parkinson's Lecturer Julie Jones, you'll find a beautiful more than 1 hour lecture and question and answer on her. So Julie Jones, please give us your story.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Taylor, that lovely introduction. So yeah, my name is Julie Jones, and I'm a physiotherapist, and I'm incredibly passionate about the value of exercise for people with Parkinson's. And I think it's really fascinating to see that there's been so much literature and research done on exercise, really looking at which exercise is optimal for people with Parkinson's. And I think one of the things that I've been particularly interested in my research is not just what type of exercise is best, but actually what is the best way to support people with Parkinson's to be more physically active. Because even without Parkinson's, it's very difficult to motivate ourselves to get into a dedicated exercise routine. So Thilo mentioned my recent research work looking at the PD Connect study, and really that was a particular exercise intervention that was designed to try and support people with Parkinson's to increase the amount of physical activity they participated in, really with the aim of trying to support self-management with physical activity. So it was an evidence-based informed multi-component intervention which combined physical activity delivery, delivered both by physiotherapists, but also fitness instructors, and it combined motivational coaching, exercise, self-monitoring, and self-management strategies. So people they got to experience 6 sessions of specialist physiotherapy delivered on a one-to-one, and the focus of those sessions really was to try and develop skills and self-confidence and capability with participating in exercise and getting people skilled up and confidence with that exercise delivery. And then that was followed by 12 weeks of group-based exercise, where really then that allows people to sort of get the social as well as the physical benefits from exercise. And then they had 12 weeks where they were followed up on a monthly basis, where they were encouraged to maintain their physical activity. So this study was a feasibility and acceptability study to explore whether this approach to exercise delivery with a combination of one-to-one physio, but with group therapy, would be beneficial for the population. And so the study was definitely shown to be acceptable. People loved the intervention because it actually ended up having to be delivered online due to COVID. So it also showed that exercise, a 30-week intervention, was possible to be delivered and supported online. So very easy to recruit to this study, maintain people on the study, and looking at people's perceptions. It was a mixed method study, so we explored their thoughts and views. You know, people really felt that actually enabled them and provided more motivation. So there's several themes which arise that we'll probably touch on throughout the session about aspects of the delivery that really supported them to be more motivated to be physically active each day. And generally the study would definitely suggest, and in keeping with other literature, that participation in regular exercise really helped them feel that improved their motor symptoms and generally felt more confident about being active. So that's a nice study which we'll be looking to follow up with a clinical trial, really to look at it in a larger sample to look at whether it is effective over time. So that's probably the latest study that I've been involved with, but it'll be lovely to hear your questions tonight about how we manage to motivate and what strategies we use. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. That's excellent, excellent introduction. Okay, next up from Chicago, we have Professor Daniel Corcos, Professor of Physical Therapy and Human Movement Sciences, who's actually originally from Essex, I found out, which is great. And he's been running this, clinical trial, SPARX. So please, Daniel.
Thank you, Tilo. So the first point I want to make, one's often asked the question, what is the best exercise, etc. I want to drive home the point that all exercise is great for everybody, including if you happen to have Parkinson's disease. And the second point I want to drive home is that this is a lifestyle issue. This isn't for a week, it isn't for a month, it isn't for a year, it isn't for a decade. It's a lifestyle issue. And so at the end of the day, you have to find for yourself activities or groups of people to work out with, teams, friends, rock steady boxing, whatever works for you to keep yourself motivated throughout one's life. And there are days when motivation is hard, and we will come back to that. And I'm pretty sure Kristi will give you some nice insight in ways to help yourself when motivation is not great on any particular day. I'm going to talk to you about SPARX 3 because it's the culmination of 30 years of research. There's been some wonderful work on animal models of Parkinson's disease. Some people refer to this as preclinical research, demonstrating unequivocally that exercise is good, and also working through a myriad of brain mechanisms that explain this. There have also been 3 important studies. The first was one I published in 2018 in JAMA Neurology, followed up very closely by my very good friends in Holland in 2019 in Lancet Neurology, followed by a study by Mack in 2021. All were 6 months, all were endurance exercise, and all showed a probability of slowing disease progression. So SPARX 3 is a phase 3 clinical trial. We have 185 people randomized to 2 treatment arms. These people start, they're early in the disease and they have not yet taken medication, and they're randomly assigned to 2 treatment arms. One is to exercise at 60 to 65% of maximum heart rate. The other is to exercise at 80 to 85% heart rate. Both interventions are very good for one, okay? There's a very fancy term here. It's called equipoise. Currently, there's no question both are very good. One may be better than the other one, but it's also a question of will one do that for a long period of time? So we have the study going out for 2 years. It's 18 months in which we have tight control of what participants do, and then 6 months when we remove the control because we want to know how stable people's exercise patterns are. How durable is it? Or when you remove having a wonderful person like Julie around, does all of a sudden the exercise stop? Because if you put somebody like Julie in every exercise facility for Parkinson people around the world, we wouldn't have a motivation apathy problem. So we remove the intervention. We begin by doing a DAT scan on everybody. This way we are reasonably confident that the majority of people have Parkinson's disease. Not an easy disease to diagnose, and so we use a DAT scan to give us more confidence, and then we're collecting lots and lots of measures, one of which is taken from the blood. It is BDNF, which will be talked about much later on. So that gives you a sense of this study, and the reason why these studies are important, in my view, is then clinicians can tell people who have the disease, this is the research evidence. It is clear, it's unequivocal, and if you do it, this is how you will benefit. Then it becomes a question of choice, and I think the people who listen to this, you all take an ownership of your disease, you listen to the evidence, and you carry on. The real challenge for those of you listening to this presentation is to reach out to your friends, your colleagues, people in the neighborhood, people in workshops and groups you meet, to try to get the message out to people who are not listening to podcasts like today. Thank you.
Outstanding, brilliant. No, it's exciting phase 3 clinical trial. And next up, we have Sirwan Darweesh. He is a clinical epidemiologist, lots of expertise in prodromal Parkinson's, which I think he'll explain. And he's running a trial called Slow Speed in the Netherlands, and he is a key member of the Bas Bloem team in the Netherlands. Sirwan.
Thank you, Thilo. And I'm really glad to be a part of this webinar. I do have two roles indeed. On the one hand, I'm a clinician here at Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands, which is a Parkinson's center of expertise, and where I see people with clinically manifest Parkinson's 4 days a week. On the other hand, I lead a research group into the possibility of slowing the disease course of Parkinson's. And if I look at my first role as a clinician, I'm encountered daily with questions of people with manifest Parkinson's around the motivation to adapt their lifestyle sustainably. And what I often try to do is share the current state of scientific knowledge, much gathered by Daniel and his group, and also in part by our own center, regarding the evidence for exercise as a disease slowing intervention for people with Parkinson's. And I do understand, of course, the many questions that I receive on a daily basis for people struggling either with their motivation or people encountering physical impairments that make it difficult to engage in exercise activities. But I would fully second the points that Julie and Daniel just made, that even when you're encountering such difficulties, it is often still possible to at least perform certain physical activities, and that will help you slow the disease course as much as possible. So that's my one role as a clinician. As a researcher and epidemiologist, I'm also interested in expanding the scope of exercise interventions, specifically expanding the scope to those individuals who do not have clinically manifest Parkinson's at this moment yet. Those are individuals who may have prodromal features of Parkinson's, such as, for instance, a REM sleep behavior disorder or a genetic trait, putting them at increased risk of developing Parkinson's in the future. In my view, there is huge potential for encouraging these individuals to engage in exercise as much as they can in order to delay the onset of clinically manifest signs of Parkinson's and possibly even prevent it in some. And within that context, the Slow Speed trial will be the first trial to test whether it's possible to encourage individuals who are at increased risk of Parkinson's, but who do not have the clinical symptoms of the disease yet, to sustainably engage in exercise. And one of the exciting features of this study is that it will be conducted completely remotely, meaning that individuals will be encouraged to increase the volume of their exercise activities in their own home environment. And concretely, those encouragements will be delivered through a smartphone application that was developed in collaboration with the gaming industry in order to make people addicted to the pleasure of being engaged in exercise, so to speak. So I agree with Daniel. It would be truly wonderful to bring Julie into the room of every person with Parkinson's, or even those who are at risk of Parkinson's throughout the world. It's probably not feasible to do that in person, but it might be feasible to bring Julie and others to everyone across the world who has Parkinson's or who is at increased risk of Parkinson's, through the smartphone application that we've developed. We will test that hypothesis in the Slow Speed trial. It will include 800 individuals at increased risk of Parkinson's in the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Netherlands. And we will assess the effect of the exercise intervention on multiple outcomes. The primary of those will be a composite of early features of Parkinson's, so prodromal signs and symptoms, which will be recorded using a smart watch so as to minimize the burden on participants. But in a subgroup of participants, we will also conduct blood assessments, which will hopefully allow us in the future to compare and contrast the results on promising biomarkers such as BDNF with those of the group by Daniel. So once again, I'm really excited to be part of this webinar, and I very much hope that many of the lessons that we've learned from the exciting research from Julie, Daniel, and others in this field, from the field of clinically manifest Parkinson's, may in the future also be translated to the population who at the moment does not have clinically manifest Parkinson's yet.
Superb. Thank you, Sirwan. That was brilliant. And last but not least, we have Kristi LaMonica from upstate New York. So Kristi has multiple hats on. She's a research scientist, so she knows a lot of the science underlying exercise in Parkinson's. She has young onset Parkinson's, diagnosed in 2020. She's an advocate, PD Avenger, World Parkinson's Working Group. She does many things. So Kristi, we're so happy to have you. Please take it away.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Where should I start? So Sirwan, I just want to start with mentioning, going back to the prodromal that you were discussing. So I'm actually a cell and developmental biologist, and I've been working with stem cells for about 20 years. So when I'm awake, I've been working for them with 20 years. My sleep has been since 2005. So that was when my earliest prodromal symptoms was in grad school. I would actually do cell work at night. And my husband and I just thought it was just funny. I was just a grad student, overworked, but I was actually pipetting in my sleep. So I've been doing that for a number of years. So I have, like Tilo just said, I actually have multiple hats here on this webinar. So as a member of the PD Avengers, for the co-chair of the Wellness Committee, I'm actually helping to spread the word for Stand Up to Parkinson's. So on April 11th, we're actually going to have a sit to stand, log your sit to stands all day long on the Stand Up to Parkinson's website. So just showing that you can't control a lot with Parkinson's, but you can control exercising. So we want to promote exercise with that. Also for PD Avengers, I am also part of the women's group, and we actually will have a paper coming out in the Journal of Parkinson's Disease really soon about self-image in women. And there are a series of surveys that we have that are going out through the Fox Insight, that you can find online. If you're a woman with Parkinson's, we would really appreciate if you can go to Fox Insight and take those 2 surveys. Specifically YOPD, we definitely need to target those YOPD women. And what else? So also my work in advocacy. So I actually am a professor at a small college in upstate New York. So most of my job is actually teaching, and I do work a lot with our graduate programs in PT and OT, and I go and I teach the students, and I let them ask me questions about Parkinson's. So I like to go and teach the students who are going to go out and take care of patients what it's like from a patient perspective. So I think that I have that option to be able to do that. So I'm going to go and do that to help them and help our community in the future. Also now, so turning it back into my science hat, I want to actually go into talking about BDNF. So from the scientific perspective, and also from a teaching perspective. So we've mentioned BDNF a few times. So let me just tell you guys what that is to level the playing field to make sure that we're all on the same page. So BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And so a neurotrophic factor is going to actually make the brain a nice environment. It's going to provide a nice environment for the neurons to survive. And so when I was in grad school, my lab was, I worked on cell migration. The other half of the lab, kind of funny, they worked on neurogenesis. So they actually worked in a seizure model. So ways to upregulate BDNF in the brain is through exercise is one of them, and also insults to the brain, which nobody wants to have an insult to your brain because that's going to put you in worse shape. But BDNF is actually one of those things that's increased in the brain, which Daniel just mentioned that they're looking at to see in the bloodstream of individuals with Parkinson's if that's increased with exercise. So we know it's increased in the brain, so it provides a better environment. So we're going to look at those kind of molecules to showed that that we can increase them with exercise, and that with many neurodegenerative diseases, they're actually decreased. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to exercise, to increase those molecules in your brain. Thanks.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Thank you, Kristi. So I'm going to kick off with a question that I hear all the time. It came up, it was one of the biggest questions at Julie Jones' Edinburgh Parkinson's lecture. But I think people with Parkinson's often want to know, what exercise should I be doing and how much should I be doing? And it's a very difficult question, I think. So I don't know who wants to kick off. What is the most beneficial exercise and how much should I be doing? And can I be doing too much? I also often hear, can I be doing too much? So who wants to start off on that question?
I'll jump in, and then everybody else can jump in. I think the first thing I would say is all activity is beneficial. So I think, and I think when we look at the evidence of all the studies that have been done in exercise, they haven't really been able to demonstrate that one approach to exercise is superior to another. And the other thing that we know is the Parkinson's population is very varied. And so what would be correct for one person wouldn't very necessarily be correct for another. And so generally, as a physio, what I would suggest is that people, first of all, they need to participate in physical activity that they enjoy, because this session tonight is about motivation. And so the first thing is you've got to enjoy the exercise you're doing. So if you're not a runner is not your thing to do. And so the first thing is got to be enjoyable. And then the second thing that I think then is it needs to be varied. And that variation also keeps your interest and your motivation to keep exercising. But as a rule, as a physio, when we look at the guidelines for exercise, it should be a combination of strength, mobility or flexibility exercise, balance exercise, and combined with some aerobic exercise. So to me, there needs to be a range of different types of exercise, but the key is the frequency and the intensity and your enjoyability with the exercise. So there's my opening gambit, and I'm sure Daniel and Kristi and Sirwan will have lots to add on to that if I've just started the ball rolling.
Great.
I think that was
Daniel.
brilliant. I think you should all memorize that. So picking up on what Julie said, the really important thing to know is that different forms of exercise do different things to the body. So for example, the reason we do endurance exercise, some people call it aerobic exercise, is because that is working our heart and lungs. It's working our cardiovascular system, and it's having specific changes that are important. So for example, if you do endurance exercise and you do it at the recommended 80 to 85%, your heart rate at rest will drop, which is good. The other thing which will happen is your ability to consume oxygen will increase. Your VO2 peak will go up. And the higher your VO2 peak, all other things being equal, the better. Or to put it another way, if you're out with your grandkids and they're running around and you want to keep up with them, then it's better to have a reasonable VO2 peak than to be out of breath. And that is why endurance exercise is so good. And that is why one shouldn't just think of one medium. Now, the other thing that it does is increases blood flow. And one argument for why exercise is neuroprotective is that if you stimulate blood flow and you stimulate it through the brain, then you are accessing neurons. And the hallmark of Parkinson's disease is death in dopaminergic neurons in the substantia nigra pars compacta. So anything we can do to improve blood flow is not only helping the heart, the cardiovascular system, but then it is targeting neurons. Now, people don't necessarily like doing resistance exercise. Some people love it, but not everybody. But certainly there was an issue earlier on of the importance of understanding best treatments for women. Well, it turns out that bone health is fundamentally important, and the way to help bone health which tends to be not quite as good in women, is to load the bone. So resistance exercise does an immense amount. Okay, it's very, very good for the bone, very, very good for muscle. When you exercise the muscle, you then express what are called exokines, and these exokines floating through the bloodstream eventually end up in the brain. And the best treatment, actually, for improved cognition, this is hard to believe, but a good resistance exercise programming, the data is very strong that not only is it good for bone and muscle and tone, it's good for cognition. And then the third class of exercises that Julie talked about. So what happens as the disease progresses? Okay, Parkinson's disease is a progressive disease. Neurologists know the progression. They can look ahead and have a pretty good idea. And at some point in time, there was a potential tendency to fall. Now, falls are a disaster. Now, one way to stop people falling is you sit in a chair all day, but this is a really bad idea, a really, really bad idea. So what you need to do is work on posture, balance. Here's where activities like dance can be a lot of fun, and you're learning how to balance. So the important thing is to tell yourself, I need to work on my heart and my lungs. I need to work on my muscles. I need to work on my balance. And all three are equally important.
Brilliant. I really, really took home. So the weightlifting I always considered was not maybe that helpful for, but I agree with Daniel. The evidence for weight bearing and resistance is so strong for cognition. Anyone else want to chip in?
Mentioning that there's multiple types of exercise that are very beneficial is very helpful to hear, because I think that when we start to talk more about apathy, you can kind of utilize those different types for whatever you feel like you can do that day. So if you feel like you can do more aerobic that day, that's fantastic. But if you don't feel like you can do that much aerobic that day, maybe doing yoga, so stretching and flexibility is what you do that day. So utilizing those different types and hitting those numbers throughout the week, you can kind of play your apathy to what feels better on that day.
I think that's extremely helpful advice to many people with Parkinson's. I also recognize what Daniel just sketched. I think in essence, there's no one size fits all solution here. If I look at the people I see on a daily basis in my consulting room, then there are people who are not able to run because of balance impairments or because of freezing of gait. And I very much realize that it would be senseless to advise these individuals to engage in running every day. But some of them are able to ride their bicycle. Now, admittedly, as a Dutch national, I may be somewhat positively biased towards the bicycle. But I'm mentioning the bicycle just as one mere example of an alternative method to still engage in exercise. Even if you have balance issues or you have freezing of gait. So if I look at our clinical practice and I look at the exercise regimens of the individuals who are treated at our center, usually those who have only recently been diagnosed with clinically manifest Parkinson's will engage in various activities, and there are hardly any restrictions to what they can be involved in. Individuals who have been diagnosed with Parkinson's for over 10 or 15 years generally do have to take other factors, such as safety or balance problems, into account. But I would encourage all listeners to consult either with their neurologist or their physical therapist to develop a personalized exercise regimen that suits their needs and also their abilities at that time point.
I just want to make two comments. One is picking up on what Kristi said about the apathy. I find there are days when I'm perhaps, for want of a better term, not quite feeling it. So I may try a warm up, And then sometimes after the warm-up, I start to feel better because remember, Parkinson's disease is a dopamine deficient disease. Exercise raises endogenous levels of dopamine, and you may find after a 15-minute warm-up that you're starting to feel it. And of course, if you don't, then there's always tomorrow. I just want to make a little cautionary comment on Sirwan's wonderful talking about cycling. The Dutch are remarkably skilled cyclists and can get away without wearing helmets. For the rest of us, make sure we have our helmet on and also look at pictures of Bas Bloem, who looks very dapper in his cycling outfit with his wonderful cycling helmet.
Here, here, wear a cycling helmet, certainly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Before I move to the next question, I just wanted to remind panelists, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. If you want any particular questions answered while we have all these wonderful panelists, please type it in there and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So I don't think I got an answer to the question about how much and can you do too much? So should we be exercising every single day? And can you overdo it? And I think one thing that Sirwan said is also going to be quite important is about do it in consultation with a health professional, or should you be trying to set your own plan up using different resources? And what might those resources be? Is there a place to go to where you can sort of self-design an exercise program for someone with Parkinson's?
Yeah, so my view on this, Thilo, is generally it is good to consult with a healthcare professional at least once before starting a new regimen. That could either be your treating neurologist, your physical therapist, and in some cases your Parkinson's disease nurse specialist, because they could advise you on how to mitigate potential risks that are associated with overdoing exercise. Overdoing exercise is quite rare. In general, we encourage individuals to be as physically active as they can, but there are a few risks, especially if you're in the later disease stages of having Parkinson's. One of those risks is falling, which can be associated with very harmful complications, such as fractures. Another risk is that individuals who have comorbidity, such as cardiac issues or respiratory issues, may have to take into account certain restrictions on the intensity of their workout. And for such issues, so to mitigate such potential risks, it might be good to consult with a healthcare professional before enrolling in a new exercise regimen.
Great. We have some questions showing. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bas. Go ahead.
Yeah. So hi, folks. I'm in my car, not driving, but just wanted to quickly chime in. I completely concur with everything Sirwan said, with one minor addition, is that there are 2 or 3 anecdotes of people who were really exceptionally overdoing it. I mean, like running a marathon every day. And they are anecdotes, and these people worsened in their Parkinson's symptoms, and some of them never recovered. So I always tell my patients, you are like an elite athlete, and an athlete doesn't run a marathon right from scratch. You start with 500 meters, build it up to 1K, and then gradually build until you run 42K. So build it up is what my advice would be. And excessive overdoing is potentially, in exceptional cases, harmful. That's my only minor addition.
Yeah, that's good point. Actually, this is an interesting question from one of the attendees. I like this one. Has anyone seen a reduction in drug use from really, taking on an exercise regime program, or can you replace some of your medication with exercise? Has there any been observations or even anecdotal of this?
Anecdotally, certainly, yes. We see that quite frequently in our clinic. So, for instance, in individuals who have excessive movements due to Parkinson's, so hyperkinesia, dyskinesia, in later stages of the disease, sometimes sometimes these individuals pose questions to us as to how they might be able to reduce the total dose of their dopaminergic medication. And part of our advice is always to conduct irregular exercise regimens. It's not a guarantee that they require a lower dose of dopaminergic medication, but there is a subgroup of individuals in who this is very effective. So in those individuals, we do see a reduction of the total dose of dopaminergic medication as a direct consequence of sustainably increasing in exercise.
And again, one addition you can see that Sirwan and I work in the same clinic, so we are on the same page. I just wanted to say to everyone, reducing your medication is not a goal in its own right. Dopamine medication is replacing what your brain is missing. So for every patient who was able to reduce his or her medication in my clinic, I've seen 5 patients who had to increase their medication in order to be able to reach a decent workout. So don't under-medicate yourself just for the sake of under-medicating, and make sure that you are sufficiently medicated and in a good on state when you exercise. And sometimes taking a bit of extra medication just prior to exercise might be helpful. This is what my brain is doing when I exercise. So don't make a dose reduction a goal in its own right.
Bas and I agree on everything, and I would agree on that 100%. I think being able to monitor one's medication to help one's exercise is really important. There's a wonderful question in the chat. I'm leading a team who will cycle from the UK to Barcelona to attend the World Parkinson Congress. We will cycle 110 kilometers per day for 16 days. How much exercise is too much? Well, the first thing is, Bas has spoken many times and he talks about being an athlete. What athletes do is listen to their body. Now, if you look at the Tour de France, they have rest days, and these people are elite athletes. And then the next question, of course, is when you are doing your 110 kilometers per day, are you doing this at Bas Bloem speeds, in which case you're probably over-exercising, or are you doing it at a relatively steady pace? So there's no answer to how much exercise. It's very individual. I happen to like a day off because it's just very good for my mind, the way that I work. I never exercise on Fridays. Many people with Parkinson's disease tell me they need to do something 7 days a week, if only a good, rigorous stretch in the morning, because certainly the rigidity is part of the issue. And so you need to be very careful on the high intensity. 7 days a week of high intensity endurance exercise cannot be good for you. Athletes don't do it, and you can definitely overdo it. At the end of the day, listen to your body. And as Bas has mentioned in many of his talks, sleep is good, food is good, rest is good. And at the end of the day, it's a question of balance. So, Kristi, do you have anything to comment on that?
I actually do. So talking about overdoing it. So if you're going from nothing to running, if you do that every single day, you're going to get overuse injuries. So you need to kind of space it out with what you're doing. I know I just recently realized I like to run, but I can't do it every day, otherwise it doesn't work. And something that we were mentioning earlier, being in an on state when you go to work out. So I went to work out this morning and it just wasn't happening. I went to go do my running intervals and it just wasn't happening. So I just cut the workout early and I'll go back later and I'll try it again when I'm in a better place. So sometimes things change throughout the day. So that's important to realize that if it doesn't work for you in the morning, maybe the afternoon, or find the time of day that works for you. And it could be different depending on the days, because Parkinson's can be different throughout the day. So there's that. I saw that in the chat, there was a question about finding stuff online.
Yeah, I was going to put that to you and Julie. Yeah, absolutely. Because postcode or zip code lottery, if you're not in an area living close to these centers, what can you do? Go ahead.
So the PD Avengers is actually working on compiling a list of free exercise programs that are available to individuals. Also, if you need a buddy, I would totally recommend going online to Facebook, and you can find the Parkinson's Exercise and Action Group. I believe that's what it's called, and make friends there. You can have a buddy online who will hold you accountable and to keep you motivated partially. I mean, some of that comes from inside too, but I really recommend checking those places for programs.
Julie as well, can you comment? So what if you're don't like Facebook and you want to do it all alone? So the question was, if you have no support and do it all alone. I think finding these buddies is good for especially outgoing people, but some people may be more averse to using these social media. What did you recommend? What might you recommend, Julie?
So, so here in the UK, during COVID, so I lead the Exercise Hub, which is part of the Parkinson's UK Excellence Network. So I co-lead that with Becky Oliver. So we did a whole heap of videos. So a number of exercise specialists in the UK who specialise in Parkinson's, they recorded various different exercise, half-an-hour exercise slots. So they're all available on the Parkinson's UK YouTube pages. And there's ranges of high-intensity exercise, low-intensity exercise. There's some dance, there's some yoga. And so those you can just cast to your TV or watch on your tablet. So there's a really good a resource for people to use, and that allows you just to use it in your own house at your own time at your leisure. So that's a really good resource, and I'm very happy to pass the link on to Helen that can be shared with people after this event.
Great. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes left. I wanted to sort of switch gears a little bit to talk about apathy, Parkinson's and apathy, and I don't know if anyone wants to try to discuss why apathy happens in Parkinson's, but how can we get the people that are really not motivated to exercise to exercise? So often people join these clinical trials on exercise that are already highly motivated, but we're missing a large group of people with Parkinson's. So what are the comments on that?
I'm happy to chime in.
Yes, please.
So first of all, so apathy means, just for people who don't know what it is a complete lack of initiative, which sometimes drives the spouse and other near ones mad. There's a couple of things to say about this. First, make sure that it is really apathy and not a depression. A depression is largely treatable. Apathy largely isn't. So make sure it is not a depression. And it requires a good neurologist and sometimes a psychiatrist to disentangle the two. That is very, very important. If it's truly apathy, then some treatments can be tried, but overall, the honest truth is it's very, very difficult to treat. It's good to know, particularly, and I'm speaking in particular now to the spouses and other near ones of people with Parkinson's, is that the person with apathy himself or herself is not suffering. They're fine with it. It drives the environment mad, but you can push people as much as you like, but they're hard to push. At the same time, exercise is and remains important for everyone. So you need an external motivation to put people on bicycles or treadmills, but this can be a cumbersome enterprise and also frustrating. And it turns the spouse into a daily trainer or a daily nurse or a daily supervisor. And what you want to be is first and foremost the spouse and not the carer, or the caregiver for your beloved one. So those would be my main comments there.
I think that adding on for apathy, once you get up and get moving, you often can finish the task. It's just the initial getting up to go. So, and a booklet for young onset Parkinson's that we're working on for newly diagnosed women through the WPC working group. We talk about in the booklet how depression and apathy differ. So with depression, you're not getting them. But with apathy, you might be able to get up and you might be able to get moving. So we need to find ways, how can you use that, knowing how it works for you? How can you use that? How can you trick it? I mean, how can you work around it? How do you get moving? And the way that I do that is I sometimes do do whatever exercise works for me that day. So it's a route, it becomes a routine. You have to schedule it and you hold that to your schedule and you just figure out what can I do that day. So maybe I can run that day, maybe I can't. Maybe I want to lift weights that day. Maybe I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'm going to do yoga. So utilize all these different forms to get moving to work with your apathy. That's what I would recommend being a patient.
Great, thank you.
Perhaps I could ask Bas, sorry.
Go ahead.
Perhaps
Yeah.
I could ask Bas a question. So either yourself or with the help of a psychiatrist, my guess for apathy, the answer will be no, but for depression, have you had success with various pharmacological interventions to help people reach a point that they can consider exercising a little bit more easily?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So definitely pharmacotherapy is part of the treatment for depression. So is psychotherapy. And in fact, the first line of treatment is psychotherapy, followed by pharmacotherapy for severe depression. And interestingly enough, exercise itself, in my experience, is an antidepressant. So once you pick up your exercise, it works as an antidepressant. And being depressed makes you move less, creating a vicious loop. So it's a multifaceted approach, I would say. There is some work from the Netherlands on light therapy, which is cautiously optimistic, particularly in restoring day-night rhythms. But some folks respond, others don't. So that's also something to remotely consider.
Just want to give you a little anecdote for something which has worked for one family. I was contacted by a person in England who has Parkinson's disease, and the grandchildren were in America, and the grandchildren wanted to help. So what did they do? The grandchildren get on a treadmill at a certain time, and the grandparent gets on the treadmill, and they treadmill together over video. So there are all kinds of ways you can try to engender motivation, but grandchildren have a particularly appealing way of getting to grandparents.
That's fabulous. I love it. That's so awesome to hear.
Yeah, I think the contrast between depression and apathy and determining the difference that Bas mentioned, I think is something I didn't appreciate as much. So the motivation could be affected by both, and trying to counteract one or the other. The strategies are different. So I have an interesting question from sort of my notes is, how do you counterbalance family members that might not be interested in exercise and support? So if you're really, how do you address this sort of your environment?
I think getting everybody involved is really, really important. There's so much research out there that really advocates that people who are got social support to start exercise, or have a social, people at home who are advocating for exercise, are more likely to start exercising, but also maintain exercise. And I think therefore that really adds the need to have an education benefit about telling people, not just the person who's living with Parkinson's, but their family, about the benefits that exercise has. But I think also we need to just be mindful of the definition of exercise, because for some people, when you say, oh, got to do exercise, they envisage a treadmill, they envisage Lycra, they envisage a gym. And I think also we just need to be mindful. And for some people who are perhaps not used to exercise, or they've maybe been physically active, they need to be mindful of that. And I think that's something that's so important. Everybody in the panel's discussed around is getting that correct exercise message out and finding an exercise that people are happy to do. And that might be a low intensity exercise to start with, but almost we need to be thinking about getting people confident that they can do that level of exercise. And then once they've succeeded in that, then we can start thinking about broadening out the range of exercises that they do, mixing it up a little bit, adding a bit more challenge, adding a little bit more high intensity work there. So I think to me, there's a combination of a graded incremental approach to exercise prescription, but also thinking about education so everybody is aware of the benefits. And in the end, I think something that's come across loud and clear from everybody else in the panel is that exercise is beneficial. And I think people need to be supported and educated in doing that. But, everybody's got a different starting point for where they've got to go. And I think the key thing is about establishing an exercise routine, isn't it? And although that last question is about people going to do online exercise, I certainly think of one of the benefits of going to a planned exercise program is if you know you've got to be at your exercise class, be it, you know, boxing or a walking group or Nordic walk, if you know you've got to be there at 10 o'clock, you'll go. Whereas if it's, oh, I'll go and do that on YouTube, it's very easy to put that off till tomorrow. Yeah. So it's about having a routine, it's about having a structure and having a plan in place. I think these are all things that are really, really useful. But also I think things like self-monitoring your physical activity is helpful and can be motivational. Set yourself some targets of what you're going to achieve each week and aim for that. These are things that can easily be done to help motivate people.
Yeah, self-monitoring is an interesting point. So Sirwan, I was going to ask you about slow speed in particular. Will some of these aspects that Julie's been talking about just now be addressed in the slow speed trial, and how will that scale?
Certainly, Thilo, and I'll definitely provide some more context on that. But I wanted to pick up on the first point that she made, and I only wanted to add that there's actually some solid evidence from other fields that having a partner or a relative of patients joining them in their exercise routine improves long-term compliance with exercise. So in other words, if you're not exercising just by yourself, but you're doing it together, either with your spouse or another relative, the likelihood of being able to sustain exercise over a longer interval is much higher. So whenever it's possible, I would certainly encourage individuals to do it together. That also ties together very nicely with the final point that Julie made, which is that it becomes part of your daily routine. Now, as for the slow speed trial, as I indicated before, the slow speed trial will not include individuals who've already been diagnosed with clinically manifest Parkinson's, but it will instead include individuals who are at increased risk of clinically manifest Parkinson's. And those include persons who very much, like Kristi just described, have a REM sleep behavior disorder without having cardinal features of Parkinson's at that moment, but who do have an increased risk of developing those cardinal symptoms in the future. The target population also includes individuals with a genetic trait that predisposes them to Parkinson's. And in both of these groups, issues around motivation do play a major role, because the overarching aim is to prevent something rather than to cure it or to slow the disease. So many of the factors that Julie just pointed out are also relevant to individuals at increased risk of Parkinson's. Those are factors having to do with building, really incorporating an exercise regimen into your daily life, overcoming the obstacles that are caused by symptoms of apathy, for instance. But in addition, these individuals have an additional challenge that they are primarily exercising to prevent something that they do not have at the moment yet. And to address that final point, we believe that it might be useful to have a virtual coach who encourages you every day from your own smartphone using a gamified application to help you overcome the challenge of starting your exercise regimen. And such a virtual coach can either be a famous athlete, it could be a healthcare professional in the field of Parkinson's, or it could be a combination. And we're really excited to conduct this trial over the forthcoming years and learn about the specific motivations of this new target population.
Great, fantastic. So we have about 5-ish minutes left. Before I sum up, I wanted to read a comment that someone has wrote about exercise, and some days he or she cannot. I find this very frustrating, as I never know how I'm going to be from day to day. It's as if someone steals my get up and go when I'm not looking. Does anyone have any comments to this this variability of their get up and go?
I think one thing that I would suggest is maybe keeping a note of what you've done the day before. I think sometimes I find with some some of the patients I see, when they're on a good day, they think, great, I'm on a good day, and they'll go out for a walk, they'll do a cycle, and they'll finish with a gym program because they want to maximize the time that they feel great, which is completely understandable. But then the problem with that for anybody, if you do say 2 or 3 hours of activity or are very busy, is that you're going to feel quite whacked the next again day. And so sometimes it's useful for keeping an exercise diary to sort of think about, well, did you feel good after that? Did you not feel good after that? What is too much? And it helps people maybe just be able to reflect better on the last week of what they have done, and perhaps maybe think about some of the consequences. And quite often it could be, if you've had a day looking after the grandchildren, while it might or may not be physically active, it is emotionally and cognitively draining. You're always on the lookout to make sure that they're going to be safe and organized. So actually the mental fatigue that you will have, and therefore you might feel drained the next again day. And it just, I think, pointing it out to people and making people aware that these are some factors that might influence their levels of fatigue and therefore their drive the next again day. So keeping a diary so you're aware, and so you're having more of a paced approach to your exercise might be beneficial.
I know we don't have much time left, but I just want to add that sometimes you just feel off one day and you just don't know why. You can't figure it out. That often happens to me. Just do what you can. If you can just stretch that day or take a slow day doing something, just getting up and moving every day is just so important. But you can also do what feels right for you on that day.
Great advice. So I'm going to try to summarize everything that we've learned from all of these wonderful speakers. So I think one of the first things we heard is to keep it varied. Do things you enjoy, include the 3 pillars: endurance or aerobic exercise, weight resistance or weightlifting, some sort of weight bearing is very important, which I haven't appreciated, but also balance exercise. So these 3 pillars of exercise, varied and that you enjoy, are really important. So commitment to exercise is difficult, as we heard, either due to apathy or due to depression. And having a partner, a friend, having a commitment that is a physical commitment with someone is really, really helpful. I think it's also really encouraging. You don't want to let that person down. You want to meet them for that run at 6 a.m. or meet them at the gym. So I think that's another big lesson, that if you can get some commitment via something external, not just a YouTube channel, is also important. And also don't overdo it. So not every day, as Daniel said, doing 7 days a week exercise is not a great idea. Take some rest days, but keep it up as much as you can, and listen to your body. I think that's the other thing that we heard, is listening to your body. So before we get cut off, I wanted to give a big thanks to Kristi, Sirwan, Julie, and Daniel for a brilliant seminar. And thank you there were more questions than we could answer. But I think Simon Stott will answer as many as he can offline. Yeah, and I think that's it. That's us.
Thank you, Tilo.
Real pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you from Chicago.
Yay. And thank you, Bas. Bas had to leave, but thank you, Bas, for chipping in those great comments. Yeah, and good luck to all the trials that are ongoing at the moment.
Thank you, Tilo.
If we're